Who am I? I'm Leanne. I've worked in comms for over a decade now. Lots in public sector, mainly in public sector, emergency services as well, but in the NHS, now in government, operational as well. Mainly coming from a journalism background, in external. And I was actually reflecting with Darren earlier. I was like, I started in social media when it was like, ooh, should we get a Twitter account? So that's where I've come. And now chatting to some of you folk, I was like, oh, wow, don't know what I'm talking about in that space anymore. So we're not talking about that. But I moved more recently in the last few years over to internal. And it's there where I've really felt I've made a big difference externally, but doing it internally, which is quite interesting. So today I want to talk and get you thinking and reflecting and just maybe seeing what you could do in your organisations to support some of that stuff and trust and culture as well. So when it came to being trusted by communities, I found it interesting how we put so much focus on what we were saying externally. Yet inside, we were not doing that so much. That inside audience, though, can have a huge impact when it comes to building trust. Building trust in our organisations, building trust in our communities, but also in destroying it as well. My experience, I think quite often it comes down to the focus of leadership as well. You know, what's keeping leadership awake at night? So often I was like, hi, CEO, or you know, my senior leader, what's keeping you awake at night? What's coming down the tracks? What's the challenges? And that was the important stuff. Their concerns, their challenges. And a lot of them these days pull all that kind of stuff and the way that leadership are talking and working into organisational culture. They kind of say like, oh, I'm worrying about this because we're not doing it this way, or I'm worrying about that because we're doing it in this way. And a lot of that comes down to trust. It's a big buzzword, I think, as well. Culture. I'm talking about trust is a big word, but culture is a really big buzzword. It's a big topic right now. We talk about EDI, we talk about BHD, we talk about well-being, we talk about EX, we talk about how we're treating our employees, how we want our people to behave. Sorry, I switched between using colleagues and employees and staff, so apologies for the inconsistency there. But also how we look after each other inside our organisations and how we behave in them. How we trust in our organisations too. Now, many of these things I think end up falling under the whole organisational culture banner. And it is a big thing. People often ask in job interviews, what's the culture like here? So it is important, right? I kind of also think they're asking, can I trust you? Can I trust you? A, as a manager, B, as an organisation, you're going to look after me. We spend a lot of our time at work. So anyway, let's get talking. This is a little bit of an interactive session. Don't worry, you don't need to move around too much. But I know quite a few people here have come with colleagues. So I think it might actually be easier when I ask you to do this to just like turn around or tap someone on the shoulder in front of you. If you've not got a friend and the only person is the friend you've come with, that's fine, you can talk to them. But I want people for 2 minutes, if you could just intro yourself, your name, where you're working, and just chat, just ask each other and respond, obviously. What do people who work at your organisation say about it? What do people who work there, what do they say about the culture? So just a minute each, just have a quick conversation and I'll pull you back in 2 minutes. Great, thank you. Find a friend, go. Okay, I know you're well in conversation. Just hold that for 1 moment. Just for 1 moment. 1 minute. Excellent. Don't get too comfortable. You're going to just carry on chatting to that person. What would you, as the comms person responsible for the channels, responsible for your content, responsible for your narrative, for making your organisation look the best it possibly can be, what would you as the comms person put on social, on the corporate site, just to be clear, about the culture of your organisation? What would you post as the golden standard of the wonderful culture of what it is to work at my place? Go. Chat. Okay, thank you. You can now turn back around and get comfortable. I'm not going to throw another one at you. I'm not going to ask you to have this conversation, but I guess the reflection is, do those two things marry up? Does what you put out as a comms person on your channels about the organisation and culture align with what you think people who work there say? So just a little bit of reflection, trying to switch your brain into reflection mode for this session. So culture is something a lot of organisations are being put under the microscope for at the minute. I know we've got policing colleagues in here. I myself previously worked in lots of fire and rescue services, very much in the headlines at the minute. And the headlines so often end up back at trust, when you dig into that. So, what does all of this have to do with what we say externally and on our social platforms? Well, organisational culture and trust that we have in our organisations, in our leadership, some might say, can leave us feeling a certain way. And feelings quite often drive what we say or what we post, maybe. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so exploring how the two are connected, inside, outside, culture, trust. And this is a massive topic, and I'm not an expert using stealing Kirsty's thing. And I just want to reflect on the sort of three different areas as we go through and give you my thoughts and opinions from my experience. So, by the way, I am not a slide person either. So, there's nothing more exciting than this coming up, just to be at. If you're waiting for that moment of can I take it? No, there's nothing exciting there. That's the right side. Okay, so something big happens, a crisis. Maybe it's a cyber attack. Maybe City Hall burns down. Maybe one of your senior leaders is involved in a scandal. The pressure I've always found is on comms to put a statement together and put the right statement out there that makes us look the right way. Oh, and when you're posting that little graphic on social media, it's got to be the right graphic. It's got to say the right thing. Lots of thought, lots of practice, lots of kits that you might have ready to go in case City Hall does burn down. I've got all the right things that have been through 10 levels of approval because this is how we want our organisation to look. And when we're responding to chatter, make sure you respond in the right way, whichever tone that is, whichever way that your organisation chooses to do it. But what are your colleagues saying? What are the staff at your organisation saying about how the council has handled City Hall burning down, or about how the leadership are dealing with the latest scandal or money or expenses or whatever it is? What are people in your organisation saying? You'll hear me say, I'm sure you've probably heard your own organisation say it, our employees are our biggest asset. And I guess I asked the question then, so why, when we talk about reputation, do we often not worry about what they're saying? One organisation I worked for, the staff were under so much pressure. When we were in crisis, there was nothing positive that they had to say about us. Internally, externally, in staff forums, on social, down the pub, there was just not a single positive word that could be said. And it was a negative spiral. It was also a huge mess to clear up that lasted a heck of a lot longer than the actual crisis that we were dealing with. When I used to work in the fire service, leaders would quite often visit stations during big moments, either opening moments or closing moments, people leaving or celebrating 40 years, or someone saved a child out of a river, and all those sorts of lovely things that we do. And every now and again, you'd get these kind of pop-up comments come up from colleagues on social media about, oh, well, if only they actually bothered to come and listen to us on the important stuff, like our kit, our PPE, which now everyone knows the word PPE, which is great, by the way, because some of us have been using that for 10 years, you know, and the stuff that really matters. So I think it's important that we reflect on what our colleagues say and the impact that can have on our social chatter and also what we say. So one last little exercise for you. If you could do your turny-roundy thing to your new friend and just have a quick chat. Has there ever been a time when you've had a colleague's voice pop up? What was it on a social channel? What did they say? What was the environment? Was it negative? What was the outcome? What did you have to do? Did you have to escalate it to leaders? See, raise eyebrows already. Love it. Just have a little chat amongst yourselves and discuss that. Maybe just 2 or 3 minutes again. Cheers. Okay, thank you. Sorry to cut you off mid-flow. I just want to make sure I rattle through the rest of it. So it sounds like majority of people either experience this. I guess one of the things I would think about, how much work was that you had to deal with and what could have been done to avoid it? What your colleagues say about your organisation is indicative of culture. And when trying to change what people think, feel, do, quite often when we think about behaviour change campaigns, we go down the think, feel, do approach. I think as part of that, we should dig into it and be thinking about what do we want people to say. So take, for example, a change of shifts for waste disposal operatives. I have got that correct, I believe, from local council. Say we're going to change their shifts. Now, this would mean probably a change in bin collections. And I know from my previous experience, I had been focusing on all the external stuff, like how we're going to land this and the big external campaign, and maybe not so much on the internal. So instead of focusing on the external, I guess what I'm trying to encourage you to do is flip around that thought process and think a little bit about what the outcome of your internal campaign can do to have a positive impact on the outcome of your external campaign. So, final couple of thoughts on my great slide. Putting just as much focus on your internal messaging, especially during crisis or times of change, as you do external, can have a positive impact on trust. And just as an aside from me, I think, I believe, the right way is always internal before external. And I've definitely been burned by doing it the other way around previously. Next. Super exciting slide there. Tone of voice. As we've discussed, and it's come up a couple of times already, actually, this morning, you're responsible for what you say externally. And from my experience, it's the comms team that owns that tone of voice externally on your social channels, even to the point of what leaders say when they go and stand up and speak in a public meeting. But who is responsible for it internally? Is it the comms team? And I'm not just saying the internal comms officer that presses the button on sending out staff news. I'm talking about tone of voice. It's more than that. We know that as people who build stuff for content externally, it's not just the person who presses the button, it's everyone involved in that that's involved in tone of voice. Is it colleagues? Are they responsible for the tone of voice? Is it the leadership? Just want to sit on that last point for a minute. Leaders, I think, have a huge influence on organisational culture and whether colleagues trust in the organisation. Ultimately, they are in charge. So what is comms' relationship like with leadership where you are? Does comms have a seat round the table to influence that tone of voice internally? In my experience, the places where we've done so have been much better off for it. I see comms as the critical friend of leadership. We're making sure we're saying on the outside what we are doing on the inside. It can be that magnifying lens into the organisation and reflect it back. This is so, so important. This is a whole topic separately. I'm not going to start going into it in great detail. I just wanted to highlight the influence of comms on leadership and the link to that to internal voice, and then the link to that with what we just discussed on external voice. So ultimately, who owns the internal voice? We circle it all back round. It is all connected. If what you're saying internally doesn't align with what you're saying externally, trust will be lost. And we don't want that. We don't want people, whether it's our own people or other people, saying the culture in that place is they say one thing and they do another. I've heard that, definitely, about places that I've worked at. Or people saying things like, it's all for show. So we're going to just touch on that. Oh, bit grey in there. Love grey. Is your content truly reflective of your organisational culture? And if it isn't, is this impacting trust? Employee experience. Bit of a personal passion for mine at the minute. It starts before someone becomes your employee. So organisational culture starts before someone joins the organisation. Is your messaging aligned with this? Employee experience, just touching on this lightly, again, everything is connected with employee experience. What you post on social is connected with employee experience. How you post it, when they receive the message, what imagery you use, it's all connected to employee experience, as is onboarding, offboarding, recruitment, goals, meetings, one-to-ones, all the rest of it. Think about what your staff will say when they see a post. It might impact how you post something, the wording you use, the imagery you use, and it might make you reflect that maybe more work needs to be done internally before you land something externally, whether it's a campaign or a single message, or you're in a crisis and someone goes to hit the button, you go, oh, we haven't actually told all of our staff that first. So just having that employee voice in your head might help. It was so right during COVID to get some of that messaging internally right. I think internal comms really came up during COVID, and it was so important to get that messaging right internally before externally. I was working in the utility sector at the time. Overnight things were changing. Key workers, what's a key worker? And we'd be going out saying, oh, if you see our vans out, it's a key worker. And they're like, I don't know, am I a key worker? And it's like, yes, you fix the pipes. And they're like, well, no one told me that. So, getting this messaging right, it's all connected, internal and external. When I worked in the emergency services, particularly in the fire service, I reflect back and I wish that I had done much more work internally than I'd done before launching campaigns externally, particularly around things like positive action campaigns. It was really hard. It was a tough slog getting some of that stuff working. It was just jarring with colleagues. And if I'd have done a lot more work internally, I think overall, the success would have been much better externally as well. So the main message here is be consistent. Be consistent with your messaging, inside and out. And also, from my experience, the same goes for people. Have you ever talked anyone into doing something for TikTok or Facebook, and they've been like, no. And it's like dragging someone with their kicking and screaming to go and do a video. Actually, just use the people that are great and that are passionate. It's true, it's honest, it's right for your organisation. And then people are going to trust it. Otherwise, again, you get this jar internal, external, oh, the comms team made me do it. Just think about the impact that can have on the trust in your organisation. Right, okay, I think I'm out of time. So circling back, slide, it says change the slide here. There we go. We've got a huge job, I think, in terms of building trust, building organisational culture, building trust in organisational culture and all of those things. This session wasn't to tell you what to do and how to do it, unlike some of the other great stuff that we've seen today. It was more just a bit of putting you in reflection mode, I guess. There's a lot of people behind the content, behind that tone of message, and thinking about your colleagues and thinking about the impact that can have. So 3 things, I guess, if you wanted to write stuff down from here to take away. Power of employee voice when it becomes external, the role of comms in influencing culture internally, and how that's connected and can impact it externally, and your role in transparently portraying your organisation on your channel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leanne. Look at that.
Give that to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Really enjoyed that. Questions for Leanne? Anything she's covered?
Oh, damn it.
Sorry. Any advice for comms people on how to do this when internal comms is in HR?
Oh, good Lord. In all honesty, no, because I've never worked anywhere where comms has been in HR. But I guess, what would I do? Forge an amazing relationship with HR. I genuinely believe that employee experience and comms and culture, who owns culture? No one owns it. Does HR own it? Does comms own it? No one does. It's part of everything. I guess it's bringing it together. Forging that amazing working relationship with HR, if you don't already have it, is super, super important. And telling your senior leader that this is all relevant and comms, internal comms needs to come and sit in comms, maybe. It doesn't help, I know. Yeah, I've never worked in an organisation, but I do know that there are some. And there's also some where comms reports into an HR director. Yeah, sorry, helpful, not helpful.
So I don't know what you think about this. I'm probably very wrong on this, but I always had a theory that organisations that put their values up on the wall, like in reception centres, so red flag was definitely a problem. And I went for a job interview once, and I got into reception, and there they were, the organisational values, and I thought, just leave, just get out. You know it's going to be bad. I did. Oh, long story. Got the job. It was awful, and there was actually really significant bullying culture. And then, what's your kind of experiences about kind of organisational values and how to properly embed? That's what you said earlier about don't tell us, show us.
Yeah, so I worked for a fire and rescue service a few years ago, and they didn't have organisational values. So in the fire and rescue service, you can adopt like the national stuff, and they'd never had their own values. And I was only there for 3 months as a project, and they were like, "Can you develop these values?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Like, so I'm going to run these focus groups. They were like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to go and speak to the people," and they're like, "Pardon?" No, just go in a room and like make them. No, it doesn't work. So that scenario for me, it was about building everything up from the bottom up, presenting it in a way that engaged the leadership to show that it was a bottom up approach. The implementation was super easy then because they owned it. They knew it had come from them, and I think that's quite often, like I mentioned earlier, like the organic content, the stuff that comes just gets its own legs and runs because you've got that support. But I do think, interestingly, in an organisation I've worked for, they're like, "We need something on the walls." It's like, yeah, I get it, I do get it, and it is important, but actually it's more about what that says and how you live it. And again, coming back to the point about working with HR, and I remembered my point now, getting things like the vision, the values particularly, and building the culture integrated into things like one-to-ones, reward and recognition, goals, and so ensuring that things are aligned. So where I am currently, we have a star of the week every week, and it has to be aligned to one of the Home Office values. So pulling all of that stuff in so it's constantly there and constantly on the forefront. And my other thing about advocacy and getting those champions was around comms. We used to have, when I worked more in the operational space, we used to have a slot at every induction, so new employee induction. So we used to go in and talk about, because that's when you get them, right? People are in and they're like, "Yeah, I love it. I love working here." And you're like, "Yes, you can be it." And that's how to use that person to get out into that community and to be that voice of the organisation in the community. It's kind of tooling them up and making friends with them at that early point, depending on your organisation, how it works, is a great thing. Not to come in and say to them, "Don't post on social media," but actually to give them, we always say it's like the psychology behind it. Don't tell people don't do something. Show them what they can do. So that's quite valuable as well. Right, can I sit down? Yep.
Thank you.